Hi, thanks so much for joining our webinar this morning. My name is Jessie Peterson. I'm the Director of Education here at SunRay Construction Solutions. SunRay secures $10 billion annually for GCs, subs, and suppliers. We are a national construction document service. Today's webinar is conducted by the incredible Chad Michaelson, a Pennsylvania construction lien law guru. Today's webinar topic is Don't Sign a Release Unless It Says This One Thing. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chad Michaelson.
All right, thank you, Jessie. Appreciate the introduction. We're here today to talk about releases, and as we go through the webinar, let me get my slides going here. As Jessie will monitor the chat box for us, but please feel free to drop any questions into the chat, and I really do appreciate questions and like questions, and we'll save a couple minutes at the end for that. So, please be sure to ask those if anything comes up as we're talking. So what's the one thing to think about in terms of releases? It's to really watch out for them because they creep up in a lot of contexts that you might not expect. And so, what is a release? When do I have to be thinking about, am I being asked to sign a release? Well, sometimes releases are requested up front in the contract or the subcontract. So when you get your contract or subcontract, you need to look at that for language that uses words like release or waive, because different subcontracts will not only try to waive lien rights, but they'll try to waive other rights which are important to you in terms of timing of your payments or just your rights maybe to make claims for extra work or for impacts to your work. So, so the first place to look for releases is in the contract and the subcontract before you do any work. The important point to remember there is that in Pennsylvania, you cannot agree to waive your lien rights in advance if you're a general contractor. So if you're a general contractor and your contract says, I waive my right to a lien, that is not enforceable under PA law. So you could sign it and it just won't be enforceable. Or you could tell them I'm not going to sign it because it's not enforceable, but it doesn't matter. Pennsylvania doesn't permit a waiver. The only time you can waive rights, and by the way, you also can't waive your lien rights as a subcontractor in a subcontract in advance unless there's a bond for the project. And so in Pennsylvania, if there's a payment bond posted on the project, then the owner and the general contractor can agree that subcontractors will waive their lien rights and they'll be limited to the bond. And to do that, they have to file something with the court in the county where the project is located. It's called a no lien agreement or a notice of payment bond. But once that's posted, your lien rights can be waived. So watch for that. And if that's going to happen, that should be in your subcontract. It should say, hey, there's a payment bond. And again, that's a good excuse for you to get a copy of the payment bond up front so that you can protect your payment rights if it comes to that. Because as you know, sometimes when you're behind, maybe it's hard to get a copy of the bond or you're not getting cooperation. So ask for it up front. The second place where you should be looking for release language is in your change orders. Because a good, an owner is going to want a change order to say that I waive all my rights with respect to the work that's subject to the change order, right? If you agree to a change order for $5,000, the owner wants to know that that's the $5,000 they have to pay and that you'll never come back for more. But there are times when you agree to change orders that are maybe just a portion of what needs to be done, or maybe your change order agrees to money but not time, and you know that there's going to be a time impact to this change. So you have to be careful about looking for release language in change orders as well, or making sure that your change order covers everything if you're going to give a release in exchange for it. If you at the time the change order is issued, you can't calculate a time impact, then you should carve that out of the release language, right? You should say I release my claims for money, but I don't release my claims for time because I don't know whether I'll have a claim. And then the third place you'll commonly see releases, of course, is in your payment applications, right? You'll be asked to provide lien waivers with your payment applications. And lien waivers can contain a number of different types of releases and waivers. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what to look for in those waivers that you sign with both your interim and your final payment applications. So, and this is where I want to kind of get into what are the different types of releases and waivers that you should be on the lookout for. So again, what's the language? Well, obviously if it says release, that should let you know that you're giving up a right. So I release all claims for whatever. I release my lien rights, et cetera, et cetera. Those things, those are general releases. They're a little bit easier to spot. But you also can waive rights. Waiver and release have a slightly different legal definition, but from a general perspective here, they mean the same thing. So when you see that you're waiving something, it's really no different than releasing it. So you watch out for those provisions that say I waive my lien rights, or the other thing you'll see a lot is I waive my rights under the Pennsylvania's Contractor and Subcontractor Payment Act. That too is unenforceable. The Contractor and Subcontractor Payment Act, we call that CASPA, but CASPA says it's not able to be waived. You still will see owners or general contractors who put that language in the subcontract. If it's in there, don't worry about it. It can't be enforced. You cannot waive your CASPA rights. But there are plenty of other rights you can waive, right? You can waive your right to claim additional compensation. You could waive your right to claim additional time. You can waive lots of things, and you should look for that in the contract or whatever document is being put in front of you. And then the last thing I want to point out is that you often see indemnity language that really does also operate as a release or a waiver. So, in a lot of payment, in interim lien waivers or final lien waivers that you submit with your payment apps, sometimes those aren't as simple as saying, I release my lien rights with respect to this work that you're paying me for, right? Owners will oftentimes not just put in a release or a waiver, but they'll also put in indemnity language, and it's going to say that you'll indemnify the owner or indemnify the general contractor if there's a lien claim by one of your suppliers, or you'll indemnify them from any kind of claim that relates to the work that you're being paid for. And so you want to look at those indemnity clauses because they also operate the same way, and that's much broader. Now, whether you have to sign these things depends on the nature of your contract. And so we can talk a little bit about what can you do to sort of avoid signing these kinds of releases or avoid giving up important rights that will help you get paid. So the first thing that you can do is start with your contract. Get out when somebody asks you to sign a release after you've signed the contract, and you think the release is broad or you want to understand whether you have to sign it, start with the contract. Many contracts include the form of the lien waiver that you are going to be required to sign. And if that's the case and you signed a contract and it's got a lien waiver form attached, then you've agreed to sign that lien waiver form and you don't have a lot of leverage. If the contract just says you'll sign a lien waiver, well, then you have some ability to negotiate with that with the owner. You don't have to simply sign whatever form they put in front of you. And if it says in the contract that you'll sign a lien waiver, then you should sign just a lien waiver, right? It shouldn't have indemnity language or a release of other claims or things like that. So watch out for what the owner puts in front of you and look at your contract to figure out whether that's going to be consistent with your contractual obligations. Now, in that instance where a form is not included with the contract, best practice is to use your own, right? Use something that you have or that your lawyer has prepared that waives the rights because you've been paid, but doesn't include a bunch of other language that would be favorable to the owner. So when you do that, you also need to be really careful about the language of the release, because what is it that you're releasing? right? You have to really be sure that you limit your release to claims that you feel comfortable have been resolved and paid. You know, oftentimes the classic scenario here is that you get into the middle of a project and you have some change orders pending, and you're talking to the owner about getting paid for extra work or about, you know, negotiating change orders that you haven't signed yet. And then you submit a payment application, and the payment application requires a lien waiver, and the lien waiver says, I release all my claims with respect to the work performed prior to this date. Well, when you sign that, you might be releasing your change order claims. So you need to limit your release to what you're actually releasing. You need to carve out anything that you're still negotiating. You can add language to a lien waiver that says, I waive my rights, you know, all my rights, except for my rights with respect to these pending change orders, or with respect to the change, you know, you could specify the change orders you're negotiating, or you could make it more general, but you want to limit the release appropriately. And then the other most important thing, or it's not, I don't want to say it's the most important thing, it just comes up a lot, is owners and contractors fight all the time about whether a lien waiver should be conditional or unconditional. What that means is when you submit a payment application, oftentimes the owner asks you to waive your lien rights, but you don't want to sign a lien waiver until you've actually been paid. So a conditional lien waiver says, I release my lien rights to the extent, you know, when I get your money, right? Or it'll say, in consideration for the owner's, you know, payment of this payment application, whatever the amount is, I release my lien rights. And that kind of language makes it clear that you're giving them a document to release it, but it's not effective until they pay you. Okay, that's a conditional lien waiver. A unconditional lien waiver would say, I release all my lien rights for this work that is the subject of this payment app. Well, if the owner never pays you, then the concern is that they have a release that they're going to use against you. And so people oftentimes argue about this unconditional versus conditional language in a lien waiver. I don't think that actually matters under Pennsylvania law, because as I said at the top here, Pennsylvania law prohibits advance waivers of lien rights. It only allows you to waive your lien rights to the extent you have received payment. So if you were to sign a lien waiver that says, I release my rights for all of this work that is the subject of pay app number 3 or whatever, right? And you never get paid, then that lien waiver is not going to be enforced under Pennsylvania law. So the unconditional conditional distinction is really not that important, but you end up arguing about it all the time, and owners will insist on an unconditional lien waiver, and you as a contractor are going to say, that's not fair because you haven't paid me. I'll release it as soon as you pay me. So the point is, you probably don't have to get in that fight, because your release won't be operative until they actually do pay you. And then of course, you know, partial and full, right? What am I just waiving my rights with respect to the work that's been done, or am I waiving my rights with respect to the project as a whole? Again, you've got to read the language of these so that you know exactly what it is you're releasing. And honestly, the most common and most problematic context there is in your lien waivers. It's what you're seeing when you're submitting your payment application. So, so if you've done your job up front and you've read the contract and you understand what it requires, or you've negotiated out those provisions that are unfair to you, that require you to waive things you shouldn't waive, then your next most important place to be looking at is in your lien waivers that you're submitting with the payment applications. So those are honestly the two places that you look for releases, and you definitely should not sign releases that are broader than they should be. They should be limited, and they should be specific. And sometimes that's hard, right? You just want to sign a lien waiver and submit your pay app and get paid, but it's important to add the language there, or to point out somehow to the owner, hey, I'm not releasing these rights because we are still discussing these specific issues. So carving those out is really, really important. All right, let's see here. We are getting down pretty close to the end. Oh, yeah, we are pretty much at the end here. So I guess I've got about maybe 5 minutes for questions. I don't know if I see any in the chat, but I don't know. Jesse, did you hear any questions, or do you have any questions?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, Chad. That was great. That was some really good information for us. I appreciate it. I do have a question that was posed in the chat to me. It says, is there a, and I think you've already kind of gone through it, but is there a standard form that needs to be used for my release?
Oh, that's a great question. And the answer is no. Some states have a very specific form of lien waiver, and it's in their statutes, and it has to be used. Pennsylvania is not that way. So you see lots and lots of different lien waiver forms drafted by different lawyers or different owners or whatever. So nobody can put one in front of you and say, you must sign this. You know, there's always room to negotiate it, hopefully. And certainly if it has language that goes beyond what you're required to do in the contract, right? We always go back to the contract. And what specifically does that say I have to do? If that's got a lien waiver form attached to it, well, then that's your form. But other than that, no, Pennsylvania law doesn't have a specific form for lien waivers. So that's a great question.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then another question that was just asked to me is, what if I sign an unconditional release without realizing it? Is there any way to retain my lien rights?
Yeah, so that's the issue under Pennsylvania law, where it says that you cannot waive your lien rights except to the extent you've been paid. So if you sign that unconditional lien waiver and you don't get paid, it shouldn't, the owner or the general or whoever should not be able to enforce it against you. So you shouldn't be too worried about, you know, accidentally signing an unconditional lien waiver in Pennsylvania, because it won't mean anything unless you actually get the money that you're supposed to get.
All right, well, great. That's good to know. But it's also very, very important to read what you guys are signing. Make sure you guys are aware of what it's stating that you're giving a release to.
Yep.
All right, that is all the questions that have come in so far. If anyone does think of a question that was not addressed, please feel free to reach out and we'll be sure to answer any questions for you. Chad, can you go to the next slide for us? Thank you.
Sure.
All right, here are some of SunRay's resources to help you guys stay organized, know your deadlines, secure your lien rights. So go ahead and scan that QR code to access these incredible resources. There's deadline calculators on there, project information sheets that will help you kind of get some of the information when you're starting a project to be able to know who's on the payment chain ahead of you and who you need to be able to contact and get some of that information. So that's great. Also keep in mind, if you're working in a nearby state, each state has its own lien law rules, deadlines, forms that are required. So if you go onto our site, you can actually click on what state you're doing work in, what your role is on that job, what type of a job, whether it's residential, commercial, whatnot, and be able to see, okay, this is what is required of me and here are the deadlines. So it will help you guys stay organized. So go ahead and check that out. Go to the next slide for me, if you don't mind. All right, if you don't mind, take a moment to give us a review. We really appreciate it. It only takes about a minute of your time, but all that feedback is wonderful. It helps us improve our webinars, get more content out there that you guys are interested in learning about and hearing about. And it also helps us get this information to more contractors and suppliers like yourselves. So if you don't mind, scan that QR code and give us that review. Next slide for me, please. And with that, that is all we have for you guys today. Thank you so much for everybody who did attend. We hope to see you guys at our next webinar. Thank you again, Chad. You really were incredible. I hope you all have a wonderful and sunny day. Thanks, everyone.